Maria Volkov sat in the dim corner of the ammunition depot, her small hands working quickly to load bullets into rifle magazines. The metal clinked softly as each round slid into place. Around her, dozens of soldiers moved about their duties, paying little attention to the quiet woman who seemed to blend into the shadows. The year was 1943, and the war had been raging for over 2 years. The Soviet army base near Stalingrad buzzed with constant activity. Trucks rolled in and out carrying supplies and wounded soldiers. The sound of distant artillery created a constant rumble that everyone had learned to ignore. Maria looked much younger than her 24 years. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore the same plain uniform as the other support staff. Most soldiers assumed she was just another village girl who had been assigned to help with basic tasks. They saw her loading magazines, cleaning equipment, and organizing supplies. What they didn't see was the way her eyes constantly scanned the area, noting every detail, every movement, every potential threat. Colonel Viktor Petrov had been commanding this base for 6 months. He was the experienced officer who prided himself on knowing his soldiers well. He had fought in the Great War and understood the importance of recognizing talent in unexpected places. Yet even he had barely noticed Maria during his daily rounds through the depot. That morning started like any other. The colonel was reviewing supply reports when Sergeant Kozlov burst into his office. The sergeant's face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he placed a rifle on the colonel's desk. "Sir, you need to see this," Kozlov said, his voice tight with excitement and confusion. Colonel Petrov looked down at the weapon. It was a standard-issue Mosin Nagant rifle, but something was different about it. The scope had been adjusted with precision that spoke of expertise. Small modifications had been made to the trigger mechanism, changes that only a skilled marksman would know to make. "Where did you find this?" the colonel asked, picking up the rifle to examine it more closely. "That's the strange part, sir. We found it hidden behind some ammunition boxes in the depot. It was wrapped in cloth and concealed so well that we almost missed it during the inventory check." The colonel's experienced eye immediately recognized the work of a professional. This wasn't just any rifle. It had been customized by someone with advanced knowledge of precision shooting. The scope alignment was perfect. The trigger pull had been refined, and even the stock showed signs of careful adjustment for better stability. "Have you questioned the depot workers?" Colonel Petrov asked. "Yes, sir. But they all claimed to know nothing about it. Most of them seemed genuinely surprised. The only person who seemed nervous was that young woman, Maria. But she's just a magazine loader. She probably just felt scared about being questioned." Colonel Petrov set the rifle down carefully. Something about this discovery bothered him. In his experience, weapons didn't just appear with professional modifications. Someone on his base had skills they weren't sharing, and in wartime, hidden skills often meant hidden identities. He decided to observe the depot workers more carefully over the next few days. He began making regular visits, watching how each person performed their duties. The men worked efficiently but without particular precision. The older women chatted while they sorted supplies. But Maria worked differently. She moved with a quiet efficiency that caught his attention. Her hands never trembled even when handling ammunition. She seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply when loading magazines, never forcing the rounds but never being too gentle either. Most interesting of all, she had an unusual awareness of her surroundings. While others focused only on their immediate tasks, Maria's eyes frequently scanned the room, the windows, the entrances. On the 3rd day of his observation, Colonel Petrov noticed something else. When Maria thought no one was watching, she would occasionally test the weight and balance of the rifles that came through for cleaning. It wasn't casual handling. It was the practiced motion of someone familiar with firearms as tools of precision rather than just weapons of war. The colonel also began paying attention to the other depot workers' behavior around Maria. While they were friendly enough, there was a subtle distance. They included her in conversations but never asked about her background. They shared jokes but never personal stories. It was as if they had unconsciously recognized that Maria was different, even if they couldn't explain how. One evening, as the depot was closing for the day, Colonel Petrov decided to approach Maria directly. He found her completing the final inventory count, her movements still precise despite the long day's work. "Maria," he said quietly, causing her to look up. For just a moment he saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or surprise. It was the quick assessment of a person trained to evaluate threats and opportunities in an instant. "Yes, Colonel," she replied, her voice steady and respectful. "How long have you been working in the depot?" 3 months, sir. And before that? I worked in a factory in my village, sir, making parts for military equipment. Her answers were correct and polite, but Colonel Petrov sensed there was much more to her story. The way she stood, the way she answered without hesitation, the way her eyes remained alert even during casual conversation, all of it suggested training that went far beyond factory work. "That's a specialized rifle we found," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Someone with considerable skill modified it. Maria's expression didn't change, but the colonel noticed her hands, which had been relaxed at her sides, now rested in a position where she could move quickly if needed. It was a subtle shift, but to his trained eye it spoke volumes. "I wouldn't know about such things, sir," she replied. "I only load magazines and organize supplies." As Colonel Petrov walked away that evening, he was certain of one thing. Maria Volkov was much more than a simple magazine loader. The question now was whether she was hiding her abilities out of modesty, fear, or something much more significant. In wartime, secrets could be dangerous, but they could also be invaluable assets waiting to be discovered. Colonel Petrov couldn't sleep that night. The modified rifle and Maria's careful responses kept playing in his mind. He had seen enough soldiers in his career to recognize when someone was hiding their true capabilities. The question was why. A skilled marksman would choose to work as a magazine loader instead of serving on the front lines. The next morning, he decided to investigate further. He called Sergeant Kozlov into his office and gave him a special assignment. "I want you to quietly check Maria Volkov's transfer papers," the colonel instructed. "Look for anything unusual. Where she came from. Who authorized her assignment here. Any recommendations or special notes." 2 hours later, Kozlov returned with a thin file and a confused expression. "Sir, this is very strange. Her papers show she was transferred here from the 1st Guards Army, but there's no specific unit listed. The authorization signature is smudged and difficult to read. Most unusual of all, there's a small notation in the corner that I've never seen before." Colonel Petrov examined the papers carefully. The notation was tiny, barely visible. "Special assignment, clearance level 3. This was military code for personnel with classified backgrounds who were placed in positions for reasons beyond their apparent duties. Kozlov, I want you to send a message to headquarters. Request information about special assignment personnel with the initials MV. Don't mention her full name or location. Just say we need to verify clearance for depot security." While waiting for the response, Colonel Petrov decided to test his theory. He arranged for a training exercise that would require all depot personnel to assist with rifle maintenance. This would give him a chance to observe Maria's true skill level without making his suspicions obvious. The exercise began that afternoon. Various rifles were brought to the depot for cleaning and basic maintenance checks. The workers were divided into teams, each responsible for different aspects of the process. Maria was assigned to trigger mechanism inspection, a task that required understanding the internal workings of the weapons. Colonel Petrov watched from across the room as Maria began her work. What he saw confirmed his suspicions immediately. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had performed this task hundreds of times before. She disassembled the trigger, mechanisms with swift, precise movements that spoke of extensive training. More importantly, she identified problems that the other workers missed entirely. "This trigger spring is worn," she told Sergeant Kozlov, showing him a part that looked fine to the untrained eye. "It will cause inconsistent firing. This one needs the firing pin adjusted. See how it doesn't align properly?" Her observations were not only accurate, but demonstrated an understanding of how these mechanical issues would affect shooting performance. This wasn't knowledge gained from factory work or basic military training. This was expertise that came from years of working with precision rifles. As the afternoon progressed, Colonel Petrov noticed other telling details. Maria instinctively checked the bore alignment of each rifle, testing the smoothness of the bolt action with the practiced touch of someone who understood how these factors affected accuracy. When she thought no one was looking, she even shouldered one of the rifles, quickly checking the scope alignment with movements so natural they seemed automatic. The message from headquarters arrived that evening. Colonel Petrov read it twice before fully understanding its implications. Personnel M. V classified under Special Operations Division. Current assignment authorized by Major General Alexandrov. No further information available without direct authorization from SOD Command. Recommend immediate contact with General Alexandrov if operational questions arise. Major General Alexandrov was the commander of the Soviet Union's elite sniper training program. If Maria was connected to his division, she wasn't just a skilled marksman, she was potentially one of the most dangerous snipers in the entire army. Colonel Petrov realized he was facing a delicate situation. If Maria was indeed a special operations sniper, there were reasons why she was disguised as a depot worker. She might be recovering from injury, waiting for a specific mission, or being protected after completing particularly sensitive operations. Revealing her identity carelessly could compromise important military objectives. The next morning, he decided on a direct but careful approach. He waited until the depot was nearly empty, then approached Maria as she completed her morning duties. "Maria, I need to speak with you privately," he said, gesturing toward a small office at the back of the depot. Once they were alone, Colonel Petrov closed the door and faced her directly. "I know you're not really a magazine loader," he said quietly. For the first time since he had been observing her, Maria's careful mask slipped slightly. Her posture straightened, and her eyes became more alert and focused. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. This was a soldier prepared for confrontation. "I'm not sure what you mean, Colonel," she replied, but her voice had changed. It was still respectful, but there was a new edge of confidence that hadn't been there before. "Yesterday, during the rifle maintenance exercise, you demonstrated knowledge that goes far beyond basic military training. You identified problems that experienced armorers might miss. You handled those weapons like someone who depends on them for survival." Maria remained silent, but Colonel Petrov could see her evaluating the situation, considering her options. "I've contacted headquarters about special assignment personnel," he continued. "I know you're connected to Major General Alexandrov's division." At the mention of Alexandrov's name, Maria's expression changed completely. The pretense of being a simple depot worker disappeared entirely. She stood straighter, and when she spoke again, it was with the voice of a professional soldier. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "I want to know why one of our military's elite snipers is hiding in my ammunition depot loading magazines when she could be saving lives on the front lines." Maria was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much she could safely reveal. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not hiding, Colonel. I'm waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to figure out who I really am and what I'm capable of. My orders were to remain in this position until a commanding officer demonstrated enough awareness to recognize my abilities and request my true assignment." Colonel Petrov stared at her in amazement. "This was a test?" "Everything is a test in this war, Colonel. The question is whether you've passed it." Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper that had been hidden in the lining of her uniform. She handed it to the colonel. As he read the coded message, Colonel Petrov understood that he had stumbled upon something much larger than a single hidden sniper. Maria wasn't just waiting for recognition. She was waiting for the right mission. And apparently, he was about to learn what that mission would be. The coded message was brief but clear. Operative White Wolf ready for deployment. Await confirmation of commanding officer capability assessment. Authorization, Alexandrov. Colonel Petrov looked up from the paper to find Maria watching him with steady professional eyes. The transformation from quiet depot worker to elite operative was now complete, and he realized he was looking at someone whose reputation likely preceded her. "Even if he didn't know it yet, White Wolf," he said slowly. "That's your operational code name?" "Yes, Colonel. And before you ask why they call me that, you should know my history." Maria moved to the small window and gazed out at the training grounds where soldiers practiced their marksmanship. "I wasn't always a soldier. 3 years ago, I was exactly what I claimed to be, a factory worker in a small village outside Moscow. I worked 12-hour shifts making artillery shell casings. My hands were always covered in metal dust, and my biggest worry was meeting daily production quotas." She paused, her expression becoming distant as she remembered. Then the Germans came to our region. They didn't just occupy our village, they decided to make an example of it. They said we had been hiding partisan fighters, which wasn't true. We were just trying to survive. Colonel Petrov remained silent, sensing that this story was important to understanding not just Maria's skills, but her motivation. They lined up 37 villagers in the town square, Maria continued, her voice steady but cold. My father was among them. My younger brother, too. They were going to execute them as a warning to other villages. She turned back to face the colonel. I was hidden in the bell tower of the old church with my grandfather's hunting rifle. It was an ancient thing, probably older than I was, but my grandfather had taught me to use it when I was a child. He said a person should know how to provide food for their family, even in hard times. What happened next? Colonel Petrov asked, though he suspected he already knew. I had one chance to save them. The German officer was giving orders from about 400 meters away. It was a difficult shot. Downward angle, moving target, old rifle with no proper scope. But I had been hunting deer in those woods since I was 12 years old. I knew that rifle better than I knew my own heartbeat. Maria's eyes became focused and distant, as if she was reliving that moment. I took the shot. The German officer dropped immediately. In the confusion that followed, the villagers scattered and most of them escaped. But I knew I could never go back to being just a factory worker. How did you end up in the Special Operations Division? The partisan fighters who had been operating in our area heard about what happened. They found me hiding in the woods and brought me to their commander. When he saw what I could do with a rifle, he contacted his superiors in the regular army. Within 2 weeks, I was on a truck to the Special Sniper Training School. Colonel Petrov had heard stories about the training school, though he had never met anyone who had actually attended. It was said to be one of the most challenging military programs in the entire Soviet Union, with a failure rate of over 90%. The school was unlike anything I could have imagined. Maria continued. For 6 months we learned not just how to shoot, but how to think like a weapon. We studied mathematics and physics to understand bullet trajectory over long distances. We learned to read weather patterns and calculate wind drift. We practiced camouflage until we could disappear in any environment. She walked to the colonel's desk and picked up a pencil, holding it like a rifle as she demonstrated. Most importantly, we learned patience. A sniper might wait in position for days, barely moving, barely breathing, until the perfect moment presents itself. Many students couldn't handle the mental discipline required. But you succeeded. I graduated second in my class. The student who finished first was killed in his third mission. The instructor said I had natural instincts that couldn't be taught. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure and make precise calculations while under fire. Colonel Petrov was beginning to understand why Maria had been assigned such an unusual waiting period. How many missions have you completed? 47 confirmed eliminations over 18 months of active service. Most were long-range reconnaissance and target elimination missions behind enemy lines. I specialized in taking out German officers and artillery spotters. The number was staggering. In a war where most snipers were considered successful with a dozen confirmed kills, Maria had eliminated nearly 50 enemy targets. Why were you pulled from active service? He asked. Maria's expression became more serious. My last mission didn't go according to plan. I was assigned to eliminate a German general who was coordinating artillery strikes against our positions near Kiev. The intelligence about his location was accurate, but they hadn't told me about the 20 SS guards surrounding the building. She sat down across from the colonel's desk. I completed the primary objective. The general was eliminated from 800 meters away, but extracting from the area became complicated. I had to fight my way out through enemy positions using both my rifle and captured German weapons. You survived against 20 trained guards. 17 of them didn't survive the encounter. The other 3 were wounded but lived. However, the operation created a significant security concern for my commanding officers. The Germans now knew there was a highly skilled sniper operating in their territory, and they began actively hunting for me. Colonel Petrov began to understand the complexity of Maria's situation. A sniper of her caliber would be an enormous asset, but also a valuable target for enemy forces. Major General Alexandrov decided I needed to disappear for a while, Maria explained. The Germans had distributed descriptions of me to all their units in the region. They offered a substantial reward for my capture. It became too dangerous to continue normal operations, so they hid you here disguised as a depot worker. Exactly. But this wasn't just about protection. They were also testing me, and testing potential commanders who might be worthy of working with their most valuable operatives. The depot assignment was designed to see if I could maintain my cover while waiting for the right opportunity. Maria stood up and moved back to the window. They also wanted to see if any commanding officers were observant enough to recognize concealed talent. Many commanders only see what's on the surface. They miss the skills hiding in plain sight. And now that I've passed this test, now we begin the real work, Colonel. Major General Alexandrov has a mission that requires both a skilled sniper and a commander who can think beyond conventional tactics. The mission is classified at the highest levels, but I can tell you it involves a target that could change the outcome of this entire war. Colonel Petrov felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had thought he was solving a simple mystery about a hidden rifle, but instead he had uncovered one of the Soviet military's most valuable assets. Whatever mission lay ahead, he suspected it would be unlike anything he had experienced in his long military career. "When do we begin?" he asked. Maria smiled for the first time since he had known her. "Tonight. We have a lot to discuss and very little time to prepare." That evening, Colonel Petrov's office was transformed into a secure briefing room. Maria had retrieved equipment that had been hidden throughout the depot: maps, reconnaissance photos, communication devices, and most importantly, her true sniper rifle. It was a custom-modified Mosin Nagant that made the weapon they had found earlier look like a simple training rifle. "The target is Oberst Heinrich von Stauffen," Maria began, spreading aerial photographs across the colonel's desk. "He's a German artillery commander who has been coordinating devastating strikes against our supply lines between here and Moscow." Colonel Petrov studied the photographs. They showed a fortified command post built into a hillside about 30 kilometers behind enemy lines. The position was heavily defended, with multiple guard towers, razor wire, and what appeared to be at least a full company of soldiers. "Von Stauffen isn't just any artillery officer," Maria continued. "He's a tactical genius who has developed new methods for coordinating multiple artillery batteries simultaneously. Intelligence reports indicate that his techniques have increased German artillery effectiveness by over 40% in this sector." She pointed to a series of marked positions on the map. "More importantly, he's planning a massive artillery strike for next week that will target our main supply depot, the railway junction, and this very base. If he succeeds, it will cut off supplies to our entire front line for weeks." "Why haven't we targeted this position with our own artillery or airstrikes?" Colonel Petrov asked. "We've tried. The command post is built into solid rock, and it's protected by anti-aircraft guns. 3 bombing runs have failed to cause significant damage. Artillery can't reach it due to the terrain. The only way to stop von Stauffen is to eliminate him personally." Maria pulled out a detailed map, showing the approach routes to the German position. "The challenge isn't just reaching him, it's getting close enough for an accurate shot while avoiding nearly 200 German soldiers who are specifically watching for snipers." Colonel Petrov studied the terrain carefully. "What's your proposed approach?" "There's an abandoned mining complex about 1,200 meters from the German command post. The mines were evacuated when the Germans arrived, but the tunnels are still intact. We can approach through the underground passages and establish a shooting position in the old mining tower." She showed him reconnaissance photos of the mining facility. "The tower provides an elevated position with clear sight lines to the German command post. However, it's also exposed, which means once I take the shot, we'll have very little time to escape before they locate our position." "How little time?" "Based on German response patterns from previous operations, approximately 3 to 4 minutes before they have our position surrounded. The escape route involves rappelling down the backside of the tower, moving through the mine tunnels, and reaching an extraction point 2 kilometers away." Colonel Petrov realized this wasn't just a sniper mission. It was a complex military operation that would require precise timing and coordination. "What's my role in this?" "You'll command a diversionary operation that draws German attention away from the mining complex. While I'm moving into position, you'll lead a small unit in a raid against their outer perimeter on the opposite side of their position. It needs to be convincing enough to make them believe it's a serious attack, but not so aggressive that it results in unnecessary casualties." Maria pulled out a timeline chart that showed the coordination required down to the minute. "The diversion begins at 0300 hours. You'll maintain pressure on their perimeter for exactly 45 minutes, then withdraw. This will give me time to move through the tunnels, establish my position, and wait for von Stauffen to appear for his morning briefing. How do you know he'll appear at a specific time? German officers are extremely predictable in their routines. Von Stauffen conducts his daily planning session at 0600 hours every morning from the observation deck of his command post. Intelligence has confirmed this pattern for 3 weeks. Colonel Petrov was impressed by the detailed planning, but he also recognized the risks involved. What if something goes wrong? What if he doesn't appear on schedule? Or if they detect your position early? Then I adapt. That's what snipers do. We wait, we watch, and we take whatever opportunity presents itself. If the primary plan fails, I have 3 alternate shooting positions identified, and I can remain hidden in the mining complex for up to 48 hours if necessary. She showed him detailed drawings of the German command post layout. Von Stauffen has 3 possible locations where he might appear: the main observation deck, a secondary platform, and his private office window. I've calculated shooting solutions for all 3 positions, accounting for different weather conditions and times of day. What about your extraction after the mission? That's where your role becomes critical again. After I take the shot, you'll need to create a second diversion to draw German forces away from my escape route. This diversion needs to begin exactly 7 minutes after you hear the rifle shot. Colonel Petrov studied the maps and timeline charts. The operation required split-second timing and perfect coordination between multiple elements. One mistake could result in both of their deaths and the failure of a mission that could affect the entire war effort. How confident are you about this plan? He asked. Maria's response was immediate and unwavering. I've never missed a target at 1,200 meters, Colonel. The question isn't whether I can make the shot. It's whether we can execute the supporting operations precisely enough to make the mission successful. She began packing up the materials, but paused to make one final point. There's something else you should understand about this mission. Von Stauffen isn't just a military target. He's personally responsible for the deaths of thousands of our soldiers and civilians. The artillery strikes he's coordinated have destroyed hospitals, schools, and refugee convoys. Her voice became harder, more focused. 3 weeks ago, his guns shelled a field hospital clearly marked with Red Cross symbols. 47 wounded soldiers and 6 nurses were killed. One of those nurses was my friend from sniper school, a woman named Katya, who had volunteered for medical service after being injured in her first combat mission. Colonel Petrov understood now that this mission was both strategic and personal for Maria. She wasn't just eliminating a military target. She was seeking justice for atrocities committed against innocent people. When do we begin the operation? He asked. Tomorrow night. We need daylight hours to position our equipment and brief the soldiers who will participate in the diversionary raids. Most importantly, I need to test the approach route through the mining tunnels to ensure they're still passable. She stood up and moved toward the door, then paused. Colonel, there's one more thing you should know. If this mission succeeds, von Stauffen's death will save hundreds of our soldiers' lives and protect crucial supply lines. But it will also make me an even higher priority target for German forces. Meaning that after tomorrow night, Maria the magazine loader will disappear forever. White Wolf will become one of the most wanted individuals in this entire war zone. I hope you're prepared for what comes after we eliminate von Stauffen. As Maria left his office, Colonel Petrov realized he was about to participate in one of the most dangerous and important missions of his military career. Tomorrow night would test not only their tactical skills but their courage, precision, and ability to work together under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The night air was crisp and clear as Maria moved through the abandoned mining tunnels. Her equipment was carefully distributed across her body to avoid making any sound that might echo through the underground passages. Behind her 3 hours earlier, Colonel Petrov had begun his diversionary operation with surgical precision. The tunnels were exactly as the intelligence reports had described, narrow passages carved into solid rock, with wooden support beams that had held for decades despite the war raging above. Maria's headlamp cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls as she navigated through the maze of underground passages that would bring her to the base of the mining tower. Above ground, the sound of gunfire and explosions indicated that Colonel Petrov's diversion was working perfectly. The German forces were responding to the attack on their outer perimeter with aggressive countermeasures, drawing their attention away from the mining complex where Maria was establishing her shooting position. She reached the base of the mining tower at exactly 0345 hours, precisely according to schedule. The tower was a 4-story steel structure that had once been used to raise and lower mining equipment. Now it would serve as the platform for the most important shot of her career. Maria climbed the interior ladder carefully, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. The structure was solid despite years of abandonment. When she reached the top level, she found herself with a perfect view of the German command post 1,200 meters away. The command post was built into a hillside and fortified with concrete walls and steel barriers. Even at this distance, Maria could see German sentries moving along the perimeter walls. Floodlights illuminated the main compound, but the observation deck where von Stauffen would appear remained in shadow. She began setting up her rifle with practiced efficiency. The custom Mosin Nagant was assembled and mounted on its bipod within minutes. The scope was calibrated for the exact distance, and she made minute adjustments for wind speed and direction, based on her observations of grass movement and flag positions around the German compound. At 0400 hours, Colonel Petrov's diversionary attack intensified exactly as planned. The sound of explosions grew louder, and Maria could see German soldiers running toward defensive positions on the far side of their compound. The diversion was drawing their attention perfectly. Maria settled into her shooting position and began the patient waiting that was central to every sniper's mission. Through her scope, she studied every detail of the German command post. She memorized the positions of guards, noted the timing of their patrols, and identified the exact locations where von Stauffen might appear. At 0530 hours, activity in the German compound began to change. Officers were moving toward the command center, and Maria could see preparations being made for what appeared to be a morning briefing session. Her intelligence had been accurate. Von Stauffen maintained his predictable routine even during active combat operations. At 0545 hours, Maria saw movement on the main observation deck. Through her scope, she could clearly see German officers gathering for their morning planning session. She recognized von Stauffen immediately from the reconnaissance photographs, a tall man with distinctive gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. But von Stauffen wasn't moving to the expected position. Instead of standing at the observation rail where intelligence had predicted he would appear, he remained inside the covered portion of the deck, partially concealed by concrete barriers. Maria adjusted her position slightly, searching for a clear shooting angle. She had prepared for this possibility. Von Stauffen was the experienced officer who understood the danger of exposing himself unnecessarily. She would need to wait for the right moment when he moved to a position that offered a clear shot. At 0558 hours, her patience was rewarded. Von Stauffen moved to a detailed map that was mounted on the outer wall of the observation deck. For approximately 30 seconds, he would be completely exposed as he pointed out artillery target coordinates to his subordinate officers. Maria controlled her breathing and began her final calculations. Distance, 1,237 meters. Wind, light crosswind from the northwest at approximately 8 kilometers per hour. Temperature -4 degrees Celsius. Target movement minimal, but she would need to account for the slight possibility that he might step sideways during the bullet's flight time. She aligned her crosshairs carefully, placing them slightly ahead of von Stauffen's center mass to account for the crosswind. Her breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that had been drilled into her during training. Everything around her seemed to fade away except for the target in her scope. At exactly 0600 hours, Maria squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure that had become automatic after hundreds of hours of practice. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and through the scope she saw von Stauffen drop immediately. The shot had found its target precisely. The reaction in the German compound was immediate but confused. Officers scattered for cover, unsure where the shot had come from. German soldiers began running toward various defensive positions, but their response was uncoordinated because their commanding officer had been eliminated. Maria was already breaking down her rifle and preparing for extraction. She had approximately 3 minutes before German forces would begin searching the surrounding area. Systematically, she rappelled down the backside of the mining tower, using a rope she had prepared earlier, then moved quickly toward the tunnel entrance. As she reached the tunnel opening, she heard the second diversionary attack, beginning exactly as planned. Colonel Petrov's timing was perfect. 7 minutes after the rifle shot, his forces began their second raid to draw German attention away from her escape. The journey back through the mining tunnels required nearly an hour of careful movement through narrow passages and around obstacles that had accumulated during years of abandonment. Maria navigated by memory and compass bearing, using her headlamp sparingly to avoid any possibility of light being detected from above ground. She emerged from the tunnel system at the predetermined extraction point, 2 kilometers from the mining complex. Colonel Petrov was waiting with a small unit of soldiers and transportation back to their base. "Confirmed elimination?" he asked quietly as she approached. "Target neutralized at 0600 hours, Maria replied. "Clean shot, immediate effect. German command structure in that sector has been severely disrupted." As they drove back toward their base, radio reports began confirming the success of the mission. German artillery fire in their sector had ceased completely, and intelligence intercepts indicated massive confusion in German command communications. But Maria understood that this success came with a price. By eliminating von Stauffen, she had announced to the German forces that White Wolf was still active and operating in their territory. They would now dedicate enormous resources to hunting for her, making future operations increasingly dangerous. "What happens now?" Colonel Petrov asked. "Now we disappear again," Maria replied. "Major General Alexandrov will have new orders within 48 hours. The Germans will be expecting retaliation for von Staufen's death, so we need to be somewhere they don't expect to find us." She looked out at the forest passing by their vehicle. "But tonight we accomplished something important, Colonel. Von Stauffen was planning artillery strikes that would have killed hundreds of our soldiers and civilians. Now those strikes will never happen." Colonel Petrov realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a successful military operation, but the work of someone who had dedicated her life to protecting innocent people through the precise application of deadly force. Maria wasn't just a sniper. She was a guardian who operated in the shadows to ensure that others could live safely. The mission was complete, but Colonel Petrov suspected that this was only the beginning of White Wolf's impact on the war. 3 days after von Staufen's elimination, the impact of the mission became clear across the entire front. German artillery operations in the sector had collapsed into chaos. Without their tactical genius coordinating strikes, German batteries were firing randomly and ineffectively. Supply lines that had been under constant bombardment were now operating safely for the first time in months. Colonel Petrov received congratulations from commanders throughout the region, but he knew the real credit belonged to the woman who had once again disappeared into anonymity. Maria had vanished from the base the morning after their return, leaving only a brief note thanking him for his professionalism and promising that their paths would cross again when circumstances required. Intelligence reports over the following weeks revealed the true scope of their success. Von Staufen's death had not only disrupted immediate artillery operations, but had also derailed a major German offensive that had been planned for the following month. The loss of their primary artillery coordinator had forced German commanders to postpone operations until a replacement could be found and trained. More importantly, the manner of von Staufen's elimination had created a psychological impact that extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. German officers throughout the region became increasingly cautious about exposing themselves, knowing that an expert sniper was operating in their territory. Command meetings were moved to underground bunkers, and routine operations were modified to minimize exposure to long-range fire. Colonel Petrov learned more about Maria's reputation from a conversation with Major General Alexandrov, who visited the base 2 weeks after the mission. The general explained that White Wolf had become something of a legend among both Soviet and German forces. "She represents something unique in this war," Alexandrov explained as they walked through the depot where Maria had once worked disguised as a magazine loader. "Most snipers are hunters who eliminate individual targets. Maria is a strategic weapon who can alter the course of entire campaigns." The general shared intelligence reports that showed how German forces were dedicating enormous resources to hunting for White Wolf. Entire companies of soldiers were being assigned to counter-sniper operations. Special detection equipment was being deployed throughout German-controlled territory. Elite marksmen were being brought in from other fronts specifically to counter her operations. "The remarkable thing," Alexandrov continued, is that all of this effort is being expended to hunt for someone who spends most of her time completely invisible. She might be a factory worker in an occupied village, a nurse in a field hospital, or a refugee fleeing from combat zones. The Germans know she exists, but they can never predict where she will appear next. Colonel Petrov realized that Maria's ability to blend into civilian populations made her nearly impossible to track. Unlike regular military units that could be monitored through intelligence networks, a single operative with her skills could appear and disappear without leaving any trace. 6 months later, Colonel Petrov received another visit that helped him understand the broader impact of their mission. A young lieutenant named Pavel Kozmin arrived with orders transferring him to a new assignment. But he also carried a personal message. "Sir, I was asked to tell you about the supply convoy that reached the front lines last month," Lieutenant Kozmin said. 300 tons of ammunition, medical supplies, and winter clothing for soldiers fighting near Leningrad. The lieutenant explained that this convoy had been able to travel safely along routes that had previously been under constant artillery bombardment. "The soldiers who received those supplies wanted you to know that they understand their safe delivery was possible because of the mission you supported 6 months ago, Colonel." Petrov was moved by this connection between their single operation and the welfare of soldiers hundreds of kilometers away. The elimination of von Stauffen had created a chain reaction that was still protecting lives months later. Over the following year, Colonel Petrov occasionally received reports about White Wolf operations from other sectors. She had eliminated a German intelligence officer who was coordinating partisan hunting operations. She had destroyed a radio communications center that was directing submarine attacks against supply ships. She had assassinated a German general who was implementing brutal occupation policies in captured territories. Each operation followed the same pattern: precise planning, perfect execution, and immediate disappearance back into anonymity. German forces continued their desperate attempts to locate and eliminate her. But White Wolf remained a ghost who struck without warning and vanished without trace. Near the end of the war, Colonel Petrov learned the final chapter of Maria's story through a conversation with a combat engineer who had served in the unit that liberated one of the German concentration camps. "We found records that the Germans had been keeping about Soviet snipers," the engineer explained. "They had detailed files on dozens of marksmen, but the largest file was labeled White Wolf, Priority Target Alpha. It contained over 200 pages of reports, photographs, and unsuccessful hunting operations." The engineer described how German commanders had become obsessed with eliminating Maria, dedicating resources that could have been used for combat operations to an endless search for a single sniper who consistently evaded capture. "The most interesting thing," the engineer continued, "was a final entry in the file dated just 3 weeks before the camp was liberated. It said that White Wolf operations had ceased, and German intelligence believed she had either been killed or had withdrawn from active service." Colonel Petrov never learned whether Maria had survived the war, but he understood that her impact extended far beyond the individual targets she had eliminated. She had forced an entire enemy army to divert precious resources from combat operations to hunting for a single operative who had mastered the art of being invisible. Years later, when Colonel Petrov wrote his memoirs of the war, he devoted an entire chapter to the quiet woman who had loaded magazines in his ammunition depot. He described her not just as a skilled sniper, but as an example of how extraordinary individuals could be hidden in the most ordinary circumstances. He concluded the chapter with a reflection that had stayed with him since their first conversation. "In war, we often overlook the heroes who work in shadows and silence. We celebrate the commanders who lead great battles and the soldiers who charge enemy positions with obvious courage. But sometimes the most important victories are achieved by people whose names are never known, whose faces are never remembered, and whose greatest skill is the ability to disappear completely after changing the course of history." The depot where Maria had once worked continued to operate throughout the war and for decades afterward. New workers came and went, loading magazines and organizing supplies just as she had done. But Colonel Petrov never forgot the lesson he had learned about recognizing hidden talent and understanding that the most valuable people are often those who seem most ordinary. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the post-war world, Maria Volkov returned to a quiet life that gave no indication of the extraordinary things she had accomplished. but in the memories of those who had served with her, and in the lives that were saved by her actions. The legend of White Wolf continued to demonstrate that true heroism often works in silence, strikes with precision, and disappears back into the anonymity from which it emerged.